Hey, what's up, everybody? So today I'm going to do kind of a mastering tutorial here. I've done a tutorial on my YouTube page already on how to get your mix down right in order to master. So go ahead and check that out first. That'll give you some good tips. I do go over some mastering a little bit in that as well. But mainly what I do is I'm giving you some tips that I use on how to prepare your track in order to master it. So today all I'm going to really be going over is kind of what mastering can do and what each plugin will do and that sort of thing. So let's get started. So here's the track that I'm going to be using. It's my track called Backlash. This is coming out I think sometime this month. It's coming out on, I think it's a subdivision of Plasma Pool. I'm not sure if it's coming out on Plasma Pool or if it's on Tracks. I think it's on Tracks, which is a sub-label for Plasma Pool. So this will be out later this month. I'm going to let you take a listen a little bit, and then we'll start going over the mastering stuff. But this is what my master sounds like. Okay. So let me go over what I've done. And let me show you what this is doing here. Okay, so this is what it's doing without any of the mastering stuff on. And you can see where it's going to be sitting here. Okay, so you can see that I've got plenty of headroom. And first I start off with the multipressor. And what this is this is just a multiband compressor. And this is like any other compressor, except it's got bands. So you can compress different regions of your frequency spectrum differently. So if done correctly, this can be a heck of a lot more transparent than just a normal compressor being thrown onto your mastering chain. Now, I will preface this entire tutorial with saying that there is no one correct way to do this. I'm not claiming that my way is the best way. This is just the way that tends to work for me. So go ahead and pick and choose things that you like from this and use them if you want and tweak them and do what you need to do to make it work for you. But like I said, this isn't going to work for every single track. This may not work for the way that you do things. This just works for the way that I do things. So I just need to get that out of the way. Okay, so again, the multipressor. It's just a multi-band compressor, and I have mine set up kind of like you would see an EQ. So I like to do my lows, which are going to be all the way down here starting at 20 hertz to 100 hertz. Okay? Then I've got my low mids, which are going to be from 100 to 400 hertz. And then I have my mid highs from 400 to 3300 hertz. And then I've got my highs going from that point forward. Now, each one of these bands has its own compressor working on that band. So they're all working independently, where if you just had one compressor, it's going to be working on your entire mix, all of this. It's going to be working on all that exactly the same. Now, the reason I say that this can be a little bit more transparent is because when you've got just one compressor working on all these bands exactly the same, each one of them is going to be peaking differently in your track. Now, this will respond to each of those peaks differently rather than just having the one compressor, which is just going to be reacting to your highest peaks, right? So, for instance, if you just had one compressor on, your kick and your snare are typically going to be the things that are making your track peak, especially in dance music. The compressor will react to those more than anything else. And what it's going to do is every time one of those hits, the compressor will react a little bit and it's going to lower the volume of the track. Now, you don't want your compressor working too hard. So a general rule of thumb on your master is to have about 2 to 3 dB worth of gain reduction from your compressor, and that won't be super noticeable. Any more than that, and you will start to notice a difference. You will start to notice the compressor, and you'll hear the compressor working. The reason I like to use this, though, is because each one of these is being done independently of each other, you don't notice the whole track as a whole being brought down. So the volume isn't being compressed. The track's not being compressed as a whole unit. If that, hopefully that makes sense on why I'm using this. Now, these can be a little confusing, and they can really ruin a mix if you don't know what you're doing. I use mine very subtly, and I use this probably, I don't know, I probably use it differently than you should, but I've found that I use this almost as an EQ. So you can see here, if I were to have each one of these flat, so if I boosted these all 3 dB, my mix would be still the same as it was before it hit the compressor, as far as EQ goes. So I boost this region more than these, and I boost this region a little bit more than these, but a little bit less than these. Now, the reason I did that on this track is just because that made this track sound a little bit better. I will set up these bands differently. I will have these gain makeups a little bit differently from track to track. So that's kind of by taste. If by the time it gets to this, if everything sounds perfect in the way that you want and you feel like you don't need to boost any of these and you just want a flat response, then just go ahead and boost all these regions exactly the same, and that's what you'll get. Your mix EQ wise won't change at all. So let me go ahead and explain this first band. So this first band, this compressor is working at a 2-to-1 ratio, pretty much. Okay. And just like on a normal compressor, let me pull a normal compressor up for you. Okay. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger. Okay, now you can probably see things a little bit better. Okay, so this first band is going to be set just like this compressor is, right? So we've got a ratio of 2-to-1. Okay? Then you've got your peak, which is going to be similar to what these do, right? Your peak RMS, it's going to do that. The attack, I don't really worry about the peak RMS so much. It's just I keep it set at 100 milliseconds. I just leave it always at that. The attack is going to be the same as your attack here. Okay, and I've got it set at 77 milliseconds, so it's a slower attack. And I've got, because I don't want every peak to be squashed for my low end. I want that low end to get through the mix a little bit. Okay, then I've got a fairly quick release. And these down here, I don't mess with. When you open up the multipressor, it's just what these are set at. I actually am not quite sure what these really do, so I don't mess with them. Then let me solo this band so you can hear what it's doing. Okay, that's all super low endy. You're not going to be able to hear that probably too well on laptop speakers or whatnot. You're probably going to hear that best if you're listening on headphones or in your monitors. But you can see the compressor working a little bit. I've only got a, like 2 to 3 dB worth of gain reduction going on there. And it's not going to sound a whole heck of a lot different. So here, watch. Okay, so you can hear really, it's not doing a whole heck of a lot. It's boosting the volume a little bit on it. It's just kind of gelling all of that low end together. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have had that soloed. You can, I don't even know if you could hear what I was just saying. So what I was saying was that you can't hear a drastic difference when that is soloed and when I bypass this, other than volume, because it's subtle, and it should be subtle because it's on my mastering chain. I spend more time getting my mix down correctly so that my mastering chain doesn't have to do a whole heck of a lot of work. All this is doing is this is gelling that low end together. Same thing with this band. Okay, so this band is going to be a compressor now for my low mid region. Okay, same thing. It's set up very similarly, just like a normal compressor would be. You've got your attack, your release, your ratio, the threshold, all that stuff. So it's set up exactly the same for each band. And I've got each band, as far as I should mention this. I keep the release on each band exactly the same. The attack is going to be a little bit different depending on the band and what I want getting through. They all have fairly slow attacks though, because I don't want all those peaks squashed. I just want this to kind of gel it all together. So that is what this multipressor does. That's what a multi-band compressor does. Hopefully that makes sense. You can see that before it hits this, let me turn this off again. Stupid synth. So annoying. Okay, you can see I've got a lot of headroom there. Okay, before it hits this compressor. So now that it's going to hit the compressor, I've got these boosted, and I've boosted this output gain a little bit to bring it up more, because watch, you'll see I've still got some headroom, okay? Okay, so I've still got plenty of headroom before it hits anything else. That's why I boosted this a little bit. I could just leave it at 0 and boost this more, but I chose to boost this a little bit. Then next up, all I have is a simple low cut, and I'm just cutting everything at 30 hertz, which I have all my tracks. I've got got low cuts done on most of them anyway, so shouldn't need a whole heck of a lot. But it's just there for an extra step, an extra like precautionary measure, making sure everything is cut below that. This center plugin from Waves, this is going to help with the stereo field. This is going to help kind of accentuate your stuff that is mono and centered, and then it's going to help accentuate the stuff that is panned and that's stereo. It's a super easy plugin to use. I use it very lightly as well because I get my track nice and wide with my panning and with delays and all that stuff before it hits this. So this is just accentuating that even more. I don't even know if you'll notice a drastic difference when I bypass this, but we'll try real quick. that plugin is very subtle. I can hear a difference in my headphones. But like I said, again, it's very, very subtle. And all that's doing is it's helping to isolate your frequencies that should be centered, such as like your kick and your bass and whatnot. And it's making sure that those are centered, and it's taking your stuff that is nice and wide, such as like your synths and stuff, and it's just accentuating that even more with this. What you can with this plugin, you can kind of view these as, I guess, kind of frequencies. So if I were to have this centered on both of these, it's not going to be doing anything. So it's pretty much bypassed at this point. Now what this is doing when I bring this back down is it's taking everything from a certain frequency and making sure that that is in mono. And then this is taking everything that is within a certain spot as well and making sure that it is nice and wide. That's the best way I can describe this plugin. It's super easy. Just mess with it. You'll hear the difference when you use it. I don't boost these at all. I don't use the punch. I don't do any output gain or anything. I just use this to help isolate the stuff that is supposed to be centered and the stuff that's supposed to be wide. That's it. These two knobs help accentuate it. That's it. Then I've got this multimeter, and all this is doing is this is just checking my mix to make sure that the spectrum is the way it should be. That's all that does. And then everything goes through this limiter, and your limiter is what's going to really make your track nice and loud. This is probably the most important step in your mastering process and your mastering chain, is having a limiter. There are better limiters than others. This is just the one that I found that I like the best. But to each their own. And all this is doing is this output ceiling is what I want to make sure the track stays under. So you want your track to always stay under 0, because that's where you start to get clipping and distortion. So you keep everything below that. So good rule of thumb is to keep it at -0.1, -0.2, -0.3, whatever you prefer. Somewhere around there is good. Then this threshold is essentially kind of like a compressor. What this is doing is this is going to be boosting the volume, and at the same time it's going to be compressing your mix, but it is a very hard compression. This, as soon as things hit that, it cuts it off. So it's what's called a brick wall limiter. This just makes sure that nothing gets over this output ceiling. Now, a good rule of thumb is to have somewhere from 0 to 4 dB worth of gain reduction. And that's what is in this section. If you have something in between there, you're not going to get a lot of distortion. You'll still have a loud mix, but you won't get a ton of distortion so long as your mix is set nice and tightly to begin with. Now, if you've got your kick and your snare that are peaking super loud compared to everything else, then once you start to boost this, you're going to start those kicks and those snares are going to trigger this, right? And it's going to cut those off. It's going to cut those peaks off because they're triggering this limiter. And that's when you're going to start to get a crappy master. Now, on this track, I set this track up to be a very kick-heavy track. This kick that I built, I loved it so much that I really wanted the kick to be a huge focal point of this track. So normally I probably wouldn't have my kick this loud, and then I'd be able to bring the rest of the mix up a tiny bit more. But I wanted the kick a little bit more present in the mix on this track. So let me show you here what the limiter is doing. So I'll bypass it and then I'll turn it on. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense on what that's doing. I don't mess with these at all. I keep that at 24 bits. This, I just keep it at type 1. That's just what it's at when you open it up. You probably, depending on what you bounce this to, you don't always necessarily need that. The shaping I keep at normal. And you can mess with different settings and see what works for your track. Try some different shaping. The shaping will make a bigger difference than anything else on this. The shaping really does make a pretty big difference. So mess with that and see what sounds best for your track. Then I have this, which is just my dynamic range meter. And all this is doing is going to help check my RMS. And you can see where this is at. Typically somewhere between 6, 7 is a good place to be. Don't focus on this though. I can't stress that enough. Don't focus on this. Focus on how it sounds. Having your dynamic range in a certain place is dumb if it sounds like crap. So don't worry about this too much. That for me is actually just more out of curiosity than anything else. But this isn't doing anything for my mix anyway, so don't focus on this. Focus on how it sounds. A/B your track with other tracks and make sure that it sounds as good. Make sure that it sounds as loud. Make sure that the mix sounds as clear EQ-wise. That sort of stuff. That's really what matters the most. Now I will show you the difference between some tracks and what they're doing. So in here, let me bypass all that stuff. Let's see. Okay, hold on one second. Let me see where this is at. Okay, so I want to show you the difference between these two tracks, and these are the two tracks that I use to A/B my mix with. This Pandora track is crazy loud, and this thing is you'll see. This Dead Mouse track is a very good master. I think that he's got some of the best mastering around. Him and Wolfgang Gartner are like the two people that I look up to most as far as mastering goes. So I always like to take one of their tracks in and A/B it with theirs to hear how mine is sounding compared to one of their tracks. Now, I picked both of these because both of these tracks are similar to the track that I have in the sense that it's very kick heavy with the triplets and whatnot, and so it kind of worked with the track that I was doing, so that's why I chose these. But let me show you what these both are doing and how they sound compared to each other. This is a good way to use this dynamic range meter to see what this mix is doing. So let me show you. Okay. That's somewhere in the range of where mine was at, right? Okay, now there's this one, and this one is just crazy. How much this track is just pushed to its limit. But it still sounds good. So that's why I say don't really look at this so much. Listen to it more than anything and listen to how it sounds. Now, this track still sounds really good, and you can hear, though, that it is very heavily compressed and very heavily limited. You can even tell just by the waveform compared to this. You can see the difference between this waveform and this waveform. So here, let me play this one. Let me get farther in. So you can see how much more that one is being compressed. Let me bring it up to this part. So you can see that. I mean, it's almost a entire sausage. This, if you look at it, this thing isn't moving at all. And then let me go back to this. You can see how much more the track is moving. I tend to like mine to move a little bit more. So I would suggest, depending on what you're going for, throw in tracks that you want to compare yours to. Now, I'm going to show you the difference on the A/B. Okay, so you can see, or you can hear the difference there between the two when I'm soloing each individually and how close they are. Now, you will notice on my track, the kick is a heck of a lot more up front in the mix, because like I said, this track was that kind of track. I wanted the kick very present in the mix. When you listen to this deadmau5 track, you will notice that the kick is not as up front. You can still hear it. It's still present in the mix, but it's not nearly as up front as mine is. Now, the synths and everything else are a little bit more up front in the deadmau5 track, and that's because the kick is a little bit farther back, giving more room for the synths. So mine was just reversed a little bit, and it was done that way on purpose. Now let me show you this this Pandora track with mine. Okay, so you can hear volume-wise, they're very similar, and that is what matters. Okay, so when you're doing your mastering, you want to make sure that level-wise, your track is on par with other mainstream tracks. Hopefully this has made some sense. Hopefully this has clarified some things as far as what the mastering stuff does. Let's see. Yeah. So hopefully this makes sense on what all this stuff does. And if you have any more questions, just go ahead and hit me up. Ask me in the comment section, and I will try and answer things as best as possible. Hopefully I've gone into enough detail on what all these plugins do and why you're using them. Yeah. If you need any more clarification, go ahead and let me know. Check me out on Beatport and on iTunes. Buy my stuff if you find all these tutorials and stuff, if you find them helpful. Be cool if you would help support me. Hit me up on SoundCloud, like my stuff, listen to it, share it. That would be awesome. And yeah, I will see you guys soon.